Welcome back. We are on the last video, video number 8 of Chapter 3 of the Civil War. We're now going to end with Reconstruction and the Americas hopefully being complete again, and one united country and all forgiven. But who are we kidding? We know that's not going to happen. So before we get into that, as always, start off with the joke of the day. So this joke comes to you from First Hour U.S. History from Garrett. So the joke is, why do they tell all members of a play to break a leg? Because they all have a cast. So, as always, take it in. But now let's get back to history. So, Johnson's impeachment is how we're going to start off today. Now, Andrew Johnson, again, he takes over after the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, after he's assassinated. He has a very moderate policy on Reconstruction. But he's not very well liked in Congress. And Congress really is starting to challenge his authority. We talk about checks and balances, and there really was a rivalry between the two. They knew that they had the votes to overrule Johnson's veto, but like Andrew Jackson had proved, it's the presidency that enforces those laws. So Congress is going to pass the 10-year of office act, which basically says that the Senate has to approve the removal of any official whose appointment was made by the Senate. So any member of a judiciary, any member of the cabinet, which is what we're going to talk about, because they had to get approved by the Senate, they also have to be fired by the Senate. So to challenge the ruling, Andrew Johnson basically just kind of shrugs it off and says, I gave this person the job, they're in my cabinet, I can do what I want. So to challenge it, he is going to fire his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. 3 days after he fires Stanton, he is brought up on impeachment. And the way this whole process works is it starts in the House. Now, a president who is impeached, they are not removed from office. That is a very common misconception. What that means is in the House, they have voted and they believe that the president has committed either high crimes or misdemeanors. So he's impeached in the House, then it goes to the second branch. So again, with the checks and balances and separation of powers, it's up to the Senate now to vote to remove him from office. And as our Constitution dictates, in order to be impeached, 2/3 of the Senate must vote on it, and they must approve it. So the Senate votes 35-19. Now Johnson is able to keep his job by 1 vote. So all of you out there who say, my 1 vote doesn't count, right here, your votes count. So he kept his job by 1 vote, but the lesson had been learned. Johnson didn't really do much the rest of the time while he was in office, and then he did not run again. So now it's going to be Ulysses S. Grant who takes over. So we get to the 15th Amendment. As I just said, Ulysses S. Grant has basically 0 political experience. He really doesn't really have an idea of what the president does. He thinks he needs to be kind of more hands-off, a little bit more laid back. But he gets elected because of his fame in the war. The North of the Union, they do what they call wave the bloody flag, meaning that they kind of put the support, hey, we won, remember the Civil War? Yeah, we were the ones who won that one. So because of that, you need to vote for the Republican Party. But nonetheless, Grant, while he is in office, Congress passes the 15th Amendment in 1870. So this is going to be the 3rd and final of the Civil War amendments. And the 15th Amendment, what it does, it says the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition or servitude. But this leaves out a major group. Women. Women still do not have the right to vote in many states. And looking at it, it's talking about race, color, previous condition or servitude. That's talking about slavery. But the South is still in many ways going to have a loophole or trick up their sleeve to make sure that the people that they want in power are going to remain in power. But this changed politics and culture in the South very much. You had people who were from the North that started to head towards the South. They got the nickname the carpetbaggers because the suitcases that they had on the inside were covered with carpet, so they get that nickname. We also start to have a little bit more of Republican reform and a little bit more Southern resistance. We even have people in the South who were Democrats switch sides to the Republicans. They are going to be known as scallywags. Now, with that, the Republican government starts to gain more and more power. And they do this because all these people are moving to the South. All these people who were Confederate generals or higher up in the military, they're not allowed to serve in politics anymore. So it opens the door for so many more people to move into this area and run for politics, run for office. So the Republican governments in the South, they institute large reforms. The first thing they do, they repeal these black codes, which we talked about a couple of videos ago, how right to vote had been denied, right for education, and things along those lines. So they're going to repeal those black codes. They're going to establish state hospitals. They're also going to establish orphanages. So we talk about medical concerns. They are going to have a major concern for those medical opportunities and making sure that it's going to be open and equal access for everybody. And they start to have a lot of public works projects. Now, public works project, what that means, that is going to be a school, that's going to be a bridge, a hospital, post office, basically anything that is a government building or government monument is a public works project. So Mount Rushmore would be one. The Hoover Dam, that's another one that's going to be a great example that we'll talk about later of how that's going to be a major public works project. But nonetheless, they provide the funds for all these building projects, but you need to have money to be able to have these building fund projects. And that's where there's going to be a large disconnect between the Republican leaders and the people who are actually paying the bills for this. In order to have these funds, you have to raise taxes. And once they raise these taxes, well, most landowners, they can't afford it. And what happens when you can't afford your taxes? You lose your land. So, looking at all these public work projects and hospitals and orphanages and things all those things I just brought up, it actually in a way hurts the Republican Party. Because the Democrats, they come in and say, we're going to lower taxes. And that's like the golden ticket for many politicians. You don't really hear politicians say, oh, I'm going to raise taxes. They always say, I'm going to lower it, because as soon as you hear you're going to be able to save and keep more money, most people are willing to switch sides in that respect. So the resistance is going to be because of taxes, but we also have the rise of the KKK. They're the largest and the most violent form of resistance that we're going to see in the South, and we'll talk about them a little bit later in some other videos. And the end of Reconstruction is going to be how Grant really failed as a president. As I said, he didn't really know what he was doing. He was very, very hands-off. There is going to be a panic while he's in office. And a panic, a recession, a depression, all those terms are kind of along the same lines. The big difference is going to be how long the time periods are going to be. So he's in office. There's going to be a major panic. There's also going to be a lot of controversies, not necessarily with him, but his members of the cabinet. So 1877, he is not going to run again. And while he's leaving office, the Democrats, they're starting to take over power in the South. They're starting to implement their own forms of resistance and change and making sure that they're still going to have the power that they had before the Civil War. And some of these amendments, they're starting to challenge them a little bit more. But all of that kind of comes to an end in 1877. So in this election, we have Rutherford B. Hayes, who is a Republican from Ohio, versus Samuel Tilden, who is a Democrat. Now, in this election, there were 20 electoral votes that were disputed. And today, we really don't have this too much where we have electoral votes that are going to be disputed. Because of the technology we have, the Electoral College works a little bit differently back then, where states didn't necessarily have to vote for the person who won the popular vote. But we have 20 electoral votes that are disputed. And of those 20, 19 are in the South. And I guess you can make the argument that this is very similar to a lot of the things that we talked about early on in the Civil War. How there were a lot of compromises, how there were a lot of kind of shady deals that took place. Now, this is something that is kind of hypothetical. Maybe you want to say like a conspiracy, because historians, they really don't have a way to back this up. But supposedly how the story goes, in 1877, this compromise, the leaders, they got together and a deal was made for the Republicans to pull federal troops out of the South. So that idea of military reconstruction, that is completely over. Now, we have to, again, look at both sides. A lot of people were saying that, well, the Republicans were going to end it anyways. So this really wasn't a compromise for them. But what we do know, Rutherford B. Hayes, he's elected president. The federal troops are pulled out of the South, and Reconstruction is now over.